Hi students, I hope you all are doing good. I am Kashish and in a previous lecture we started with a poem in the Bazaars of Hyderabad where we studied about Sarojini Naidu, and we began with the poem. We studied first three stanzas of the poem where we saw that how the poem is set in particularly in Hyderabad, and the poet is describing about the bazaar in Hyderabad, and in that the poet has tried to convey a message of how rich Indian culture is and how rich Indian products are. The poem is in the form of question and answer, where in every stanza the poet is asking a question to a merchant or vendor, and then in turn they are replying. They reply to her what actually they are selling. So in this lecture we will see what happens next in the poem. Students, this is our fourth stanza of the poem. Why do you cry, O ye fruit men? Citron, pomegranate, and plum. What do you play, O musicians? Sitar, sarangi, and drum. What do you chant, O magicians? Spells for eons to come. So we can see that in this stanza the poet goes on meeting vendors selling fruits and ask them what they are selling by crying. Crying here actually doesn't refer to actual tears, but crying here refers to the way the vendors try to shout at top of their voice to attract the buyers. So the crying here refers to the shout of a vendors in order to attract the buyer. So in the bazaars of Hyderabad now, the poet asks the fruit sellers what fruits are they selling, or what are they selling, and they answer that they are selling citron, fruits like lemon, or you can say fruits with citric acid, and pomegranate and plum. After that the poet meets musician and asks them the same question, asks them the question what they are playing, or what instruments are they playing. To which the musicians reply that they are playing sitar, sarangi, and drum. You can notice that these are all types of instruments that are used for music. So when the poet asks the musicians what are they playing, or which instrument or what instruments they are using to play the music, so the musicians reply that they are playing on sitar, sarangi, and drum. After that the poet moves towards magician, and she asks magicians that what are they chanting, and she asks them what are they chanting. So the magicians reply that he is chanting the spells to bring in eons. Eons is actually a divine power, or a power or divine power. So who would help him perform his magic tricks. So here the magician replies that he is performing eons, or he is chanting eons, or a divine chants to a supreme deity or god to help him show their magic tricks. And this is the last stanza of our poem, where the poet finally reaches the flower girls. So the stanza goes like, what do you weave, O ye flower girls, with tassels of azure and red, crowns for the brow of a bridegroom, chaplets to garland his bed, shields of white blossoms new garnered to perfume the sleep of the dead. So this is the last stanza of the poem, and here the poet finally comes to an end of the market, and she reaches flower girls and asks them what they were weaving, or what are they doing or weaving with that azure and red color tassel. Now what is azure? Azure is actually a deep blue color. So the poet here is asking that what are they doing with this bright blue and red threads. Tassels are actually strands of thread, you can say. So here the poet asks the flower girls that what are they weaving with this azure and red flowers in the tassel. And the flower girls reply that they are weaving, or they are making garlands for the bride and the groom and to adorn their bed for the wedding night. So they are actually they reply that they are actually making arrangements for the bed for the bridegroom, and they are making the flowers to decorate the bedroom of the newly married couple. And apart from that, they were also they replied that they are also making sheets of newly brought white flowers for use on the dead man's grave for fragrance. So the flower girls reply that on the one hand, with the bright blue and red flowers, they are making or they are trying to make garland for the newly married couples for their wedding night. And on the other hand, they say that with the newly fresh white flowers, they are trying to make sheets of white color flowers to fill a dead person's grave with fragrance. So thus they are making everything from one's joys to his grief. So here the poet tries to show us that the flower girls are actually making or actually doing two things for the two different people, and here it reflects two different emotions. On one hand, it is a wedding scene and it is like a scene of happiness, and on the other hand, it's about the person who is dead, and it reflects a scene of sadness and sorrow. And thus we can see that the poet Sarojini Naidu in this poem represents our Indian market to give us a sense of the rich Indian heritage and show us about the richness of India and how rich the bazaars of India are. This poem was actually written during the period of Indian freedom struggle, and this poem acted as a weapon to fight against the British goods when the Indians rejected the Swadeshi goods or the foreign products during the Swadeshi movement. So this poem was written during that period where Sarojini Naidu tried to show the richness of the Indian markets and tried to praise or show how rich the Indian markets and the Indian products are. So through this poem she tried to pursue the Indians to buy the Indian products and visit Indian markets and tried to buy goods from Indian vendors and avoid and boycott European goods. So, in the poem, in the Bazaars of Hyderabad, we saw that the poem is actually set in Hyderabad, and the poem gives the readers a panoramic view of the traditional Indian bazaar, crowded with merchants, vendors, peddlers, goldsmiths, fruit sellers, and flower sellers, musicians, magicians, and goldsmiths. The poem is rich in imagery and description, as we can see that the poet has provided us with lots of images when you read the poem, actually you can feel the scene of market. So the poem is rich in imagery and description, and it's a very descriptive poem where the poet has described the Indian market in detail, evoking the sights, fragrance, and the sounds of bazaars. The elements of the poetry includes the theme and the style and the poetic devices used. So the theme of the poem, or the main part or the topic or the point on which the poet has spoken, is this poem is a celebration of the traditional Indian bazaars. Through the list of the wares items, the poem gives us gives us a picture of the cycle of the life with its many phases, from music to the pleasure, like pleasure including like the sitars, sarangi, drums, chessmen and dice, and the belts of golds for the dancers, and right from it to the war where the scabbards are used, and from marriages where we can see, where we saw that the flowers to crown a bridegroom was made in the market, and from a scene of happiness to a funeral part where we saw that a sheet of perfume, a sheet of like white flowers were getting ready to perfume the slip of the dead, or it was getting ready to be spread on the grave of a dead person. So this bazaar represents the cyclical continuity of the life, and it shows all aspects of the life. Like it describes about the fruitsman, then it talked about the goldsmith and the jewelries that are worn by the women, and then it talked about, or it reflected, or it gave us the images about the spices that are used in the Indian food, and then it like discussed about the swords that are used by the kings, and then flowers that are used on the happy and the sad occasion. It also talked about the entertainment where musicians were there, and then where magicians were there. So this poem actually presented the cyclical continuity of the life, and described about all the facets of the life. Then when we talk about the style, we can see that each verse of the poem begins with a question to a group of people in the market, followed by the descriptive list that answers the question. So we can see each stanza begins with a question asked by the poet, and followed by the answer, the reply given by the particular person. So the poem evokes the pictures, sounds and scents of the bazaar with its rich and evocative imagery, making the readers feel, as the title suggests, that they are in the bazaar. So like the style in which the poet is written, when you read it, you can actually feel your presence in the bazaar, and you can actually see, sense that you are roaming in the bazaar. There are lots of imagery that is provided in the poem. Imagery is actually which appeals our senses and which help us to create a picture in our mind. Some examples are like visual imagery, where the display of wares is shown, and when we talk about turbans of crimson and silver, so at that moment automatically a turban of crimson and silver color comes in your mind. Then purple brocade, then panels of amber is actually a yellowish kind of a metal, or a metal or kind of thing that is used for framing the mirrors and for other framework, and handles of jade. So these are all the examples of visual imagery, and when we just speak of these things, it appears in your mind. Apart from that, there are like gustatory imagery, like the sensory imagery, where you can like scent of sandalwood, henna, spices, citrus fruits, the perfumes of the flowers. So the taste of the citrus fruits, pomegranates and plums, this all are also like very well described by the poet, and it creates an imagery for the readers. Apart from that, we also, like in the poem, we saw that there are examples of auditory imagery, where auditory imagery, like the cry of the fruitman. When I tell you the cry of the fruitman, or the fruitman calling the people to buy the fruit, you can actually sense their voice, right? Or you can actually come an incident where the fruitman is actually crying to attract the buyers comes in your mind. And the music played by the musicians, the chanting of the magicians, and bells and anklets, and this all creates a very rich imagery in the minds of the reader and leaves a great effect on the reader. So students, here we come to an end of our lecture. I really hope that you all understood the poem. This poem is a very easy poem, but at the same time it has lots of elements which which as a student you need to understand. This is a very famous poem in English literature, and this is an amazing masterpiece by Sarojini Naidu, and people from all over the world love this poem, and this poem holds a very important place in English literature. So in a nutshell, it's an important poem. It's a very important poem, and I request you to go through the poem once again, listen to the lecture once again, once again till you understand the poem thoroughly. In the next lecture, we'll discuss the questions that are given in the textbook. So till then, go through the poem, try to understand it, and so it will be very easy for you when we come to discuss the questions. Okay, thank you. Thanks for listening patiently, and take care. Bye.